Thank you all for coming. I can't believe how many people are here. It's a standing room only. Tonight's topic is, can Israel survive another Obama term? And I know that we are dying to find out the answer. And we have three distinguished panelists who will help us. First, in the middle, is Professor Eugene Kontorovich. Professor Kontorovich specializes in constitutional and international law. His research focuses on extending the economic analysis of law to public law. He is also one of the leading experts on maritime piracy and universal jurisdiction, and has been called on to advise lawyers in historic piracy trials around the world. He is working on a book, Justice at Sea, Piracy and the Limits of International Criminal Law, under contract with Harvard University Press, the president's alma mater. On my left but your right is Matthew RJ Brodsky, who is the Director of Policy for the Jewish Policy Center and editor of the JPC's journal inFOCUS Quarterly. Before joining the JPC, Mr. Brodsky was a senior geopolitical analyst for Intelliwiz, LLC, and a Legacy Heritage Fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. He has briefed and advised members of Congress, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, Special Operations Command, and the National Security Council. A specialist in Mideast affairs and Arab politics, he holds a Master's of Arts degree from Tel Aviv University in Mideast history. Next, but not least, is our friend Richard Baehr, who's Richard is the chief political correspondent for the American Thinker. Richard is also a management consultant in the healthcare field and is the president of Richard Baehr and Associates. He frequently serves as an expert witness in healthcare litigation cases involving planning and financial matters. Richard has a long-standing interest in the Middle East and American politics and is a frequent speaker and writer on these subjects. He has spoken at many Jewish organization meetings, synagogues, and colleges on various topics: Israeli-Palestinian relations, the war in Lebanon, American politics in Israel, the future of Israel in the Middle East, and American political trends. My understanding is that there was a lottery and Richard won it, so he'll be speaking first. May I present Richard Baehr.
Pleasure to see so many people here. I want to thank Mike Menace for doing the RJC version of the pledge rather than the NBC version of the pledge. And at some future event, I'm hoping that we can get Jim Cornelius in here to do Hatikva and the Star-Spangled Banner. I also want to thank my panelists for agreeing to give up the balance of their time so I'll be able to make work. And I did tell Jeff that any jokes get added to my time. Okay. There's going to be a lot of talk tonight about Obama and what he has done, and the title of this presentation is, Can Israel Survive Another Obama Term? And I'm going to start really by dealing with another issue, which is, will there be another Obama term? And the good news, I think, is that the chances of that happening have decreased somewhat over the last few months, and 17 months out, there's a long way to be able to be speculative about these things, but having been forced to make predictions for our website and having gotten 144 of 150 states right in the last 3 elections, that's worth something. Of course, I could get 35 right this time. But there are a couple things that are very positive indicators. One is, and I'm going to make the Jewish vote a secondary issue. Jews are obsessed with the Jewish vote, and the Jewish vote is, we're about 2% of the population. We're about 2.5% of those who vote because we're one of the oldest age groups in the country other than the Shakers in Maine. And Jews vote 75-25, 70-30. That's been the pattern. And really, the Republicans got punished in 1992, really for James Baker's statement at the start of the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. And Bush got 30% in 1988, and he only got 10% in 1992. The Republicans have been moving off of that floor, but have not gotten back yet to the level they were for Bush in 1988. I think there are certainly prospects for the Jewish vote being 30% or more this time. Everyone talks about that Obama won 78% of the Jewish vote. That's based on an exit poll in which the Jewish sample was 325 out of close to 20,000 people sampled. Jews were underrepresented. If Jews as a group were underrepresented, you think it's more likely the guys with the clipboards were talking to Hasidic Jews and getting their opinion, or they were talking to the people on the Upper West Side of Manhattan carrying the New York Times and listening to NPR on their headphones. Nonetheless, I think it's highly likely that that Obama won a very large percentage of the vote. But the 78 number is meaningless. It doesn't indicate that Obama did better really in 2008 than John Kerry did in 2004. There is one other case where an existing president running for re-election has been punished by the Jewish community. Bush in 1992, Jimmy Carter in 1980. Carter is the only Democrat who got less than 50% of the vote. John Anderson got 15%, Reagan got 39%. Again, the vote nationally was Reagan won by 9%, but that's the closest the Jewish vote has been to the national vote really in the last 50 or 60 years. Will Obama get punished the same way? I don't think so. I think the level of mental illness among liberal Jews has probably expanded over the last 20 years. As far as the Jewish vote, there are only a few states where it matters. Most Jews in the country live in Massachusetts, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Maryland. Those are not competitive states. There are 5 states where a shift in the Jewish vote can make a difference. Most significant is Florida, which Obama won by less than 3% last time. And clearly the Obama team is nervous about Florida. The visit to Puerto Rico last week was not because they needed more Puerto Rican votes in New York State, which they don't, but because the fastest growing Hispanic community in Florida is Puerto Ricans in the corridor between Tampa and Orlando. So they're hoping if they lose votes on the Jewish side, they can make it up among Puerto Ricans. Jews also could make a difference in a few other toss-up states, Nevada, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, though the Jewish percentage in those states is a little bit less than in Florida. Where the Jewish vote will matter, or where views on Israel will matter, is much more among the evangelical community. And if the evangelical community voted 70% for John McCain, they may vote more strongly this time for the Republican. And you can tell that Republicans are messaging to the evangelical community already. Michelle Bachmann came out with a remarkable 5 or 6 minute YouTube video that's on her website. You should all see it. And evangelicals in Iowa, the first in the nation caucus, over 50% of the voters in the Republican primaries typically are evangelical in Iowa. So it'll make a difference. And you can tell in New Hampshire there wasn't a lot of talk about Israel. It's not a big evangelical community. It's domestic issues, first really big debate. That will change, I think, in South Carolina. It'll change in Iowa. It'll change in other states. These are some of the numbers that give me some hope about 2012. Right now, the right direction, wrong direction. How do people feel about the direction of the country? When George Bush in 2007 and 2008 was really on his back politically, 15 to 20% of people thought the country was moving in the right direction. When Obama got elected, that number moved up into the 40 to 50% range. It's now down to 32%. There are twice as many people think the country is moving in the wrong direction than the right direction. The percentage of the country that blames George Bush for the state of the economy today is dropping every single month. It is becoming much harder sell to say the state of the economy now is because of what was inherited. The generic vote for the U.S. House, the Republicans have opened up a 6% lead, very similar to what they had right before Election Day in 2010, which was a terrific year for the Republicans. Obama's personal approval level, it got a bounce as expected after he took out bin Laden. I think a much bigger deal was last night when the FBI arrested Whitey Bulger in California. But the level for Obama got up to 52% approval, 52-40. Now it's back down 47-47. A president running for re-election who's in the high 40s is highly vulnerable. When George Bush won very narrowly in 2004, had he lost Ohio, he wouldn't have been re-elected. George Bush's approval rating at election day in 2004 was between 51 and 52%. So Obama's 4 to 5% below that. I think it's more likely it'll drop than go up over the next 16 or 17 months, because I don't see any major reason why there's going to be any surge of happiness with his job performance. And in fact, one might argue that there's no job that's being done since April, when the campaign was announced. 1/3 of all the days that the president has served have been at fundraisers. The Electoral College has moved in our direction. As a result of reapportionment, the states that George Bush won had 286 electoral votes in 2004. Now those same states are worth 292. That's like moving Nevada from the Democrats to the Republicans, just because of the shift in population of the states. Texas picked up 4, Florida picked up 2. The unemployment rate. Since FDR, no president has been elected, and no president's been re-elected with an unemployment rate greater than 7.2%. And that was the rate when Reagan ran in 1984. So some may argue, well, if the unemployment rate's 8%, that's no big. Obama can get re-elected too. The difference is 7.2 was coming down from 10, which is what it was really in the first year of the Reagan administration. So when he ran for re-election, the unemployment rate was down. GDP growth was fairly significant, not what we're seeing now, where GDP growth is stagnant. Unemployment rate now is 9.1%, higher than it is than when Obama took office. You can see the ads that you're better off than you were 4 years ago. The white vote. America's voting patterns are becoming more racially polarized. In 2004, the white vote went for George Bush by 17%. In 2008, the white vote went for John McCain by only 12%. So anybody who accuses America of being a racist country, Barack Obama did 5 points better on the white vote than John Kerry did 4 years earlier. But here's the story. There's hope and there's change and there's excitement and redemption, and you feel like you're getting back into the glory days of the civil rights movement, and you elect somebody. But if he fails on the job, you don't need to re-elect him, and you're not a racist for voting for his opponent. It's the same as the first black manager in professional baseball, or the first black football coach in the SEC. It's a great thing when they're hired, but they have to produce. So I say this is the Tyrone Willingham test now for Barack Obama. He has not taken the nation to a bowl game. Now, in a presidential election year, you do get a different mix of the population. White voters are a smaller percentage than they are in off-year elections, by about 3 or 4%. But if the white vote in 2010, which was 61 to 38 for the Republicans, stays at that level, there is an excellent chance the Republicans will win the popular vote. And if they win the popular vote, I think there's a pretty good shot they'll also win the Electoral College. Obama is trying to run for re-election by assembling a coalition of small pieces, not appealing to America, but appealing to unions, to blacks, to gays, to Latinos, to Arabs, to Jews, to academics, to young voters, and to other professional liberals. Is it going to be enough? Well, last time he carried the independent vote. Right now, independents, their approval rating for Obama is negative. I think that the core Democratic constituencies I added are not enough to ensure his election. Let's spend a couple, how am I doing on time? 5 minutes. A little bit about the Electoral College. In 2008, Obama targeted 10 states that were won by George Bush in 2004. He won 9 of them. The guy ran a tremendously effective campaign. The only one of the 10 states he lost was Missouri by 4,000 votes. The other 9 he picked off were Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado. In 2008, the Republicans didn't seriously compete in any of the John Kerry states. The closest was a late effort by John McCain when he was clearly struggling and sort of trying to shoot something up from beyond half court. This year, that'll be different. I think there are at least 4 Kerry or blue states that are potentially in play, depending on who the Republican ticket is. They include Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and most likely, I think, New Hampshire. Of the 9 states that Obama picked off from George Bush, I put them in different categories. I think it's very unlikely Obama will carry Indiana. Very unlikely he will also win North Carolina again, which he only won by 0.3% last time. Florida is a toss-up, but I think slightly leans in our direction. If the Republican nominee happens to pick Marco Rubio as a vice presidential pick, I think Florida would be a safe state for the Republicans. One of the nice things is you're a senator, you can be picked the vice president, only lose 2 months out of your life, not like running for president, and you keep your Senate job. The Midwestern states, also Virginia. This was a state Obama devoted tremendous attention to because of the real growth of what I'll call the government bureaucracy types living in the counties just south of Washington, D.C. And he won the state by 6%. First Democrat to win the state since Lyndon Johnson. Everybody I talk to who lives in Virginia, who's a political analyst, thinks the state has moved hard to the right. Bob McConnell got elected governor by 17%. Republicans picked up 3 House seats. Virginia, I think, looks pretty solid. Iowa is one of those 50-50 states. So is Ohio. New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, those states very much will depend on who's the Republican nominee. If Republicans have someone like Rick Perry from Texas who has done well among Hispanics, or has Marco Rubio who is Hispanic himself, or another Hispanic Republican is put on the ticket. Obviously those 3 states, a couple points can make the difference between a Republican carrying them and a Democrat. Finally, within the Republican Party itself, with the exception of one candidate, and that's Ron Paul, every one of the Republican nominees, potential nominees, everyone who's in the race right now, is very solid on the U.S.-Israel relationship. This is not looking at a case of Barack Obama like Ed Lasky was in 2007 and saying, funny, the guys who were his mentors on the Middle East were Rashid Khalidi, Edward Said, Ali Abu Nima, Bill Ayers, and Reverend Wright. I wonder how he's going to be on our issue. Oh wait, Penny Pritzker says he's fine. Among the Republicans, and this is interesting too, those who are governors have had less experience on the foreign policy issues. Romney, because he's run once before nationally, is further along on those issues. But where you see the real sort of guts and fire pro-Israel support coming out now from the candidates are from those who have been in the Congress. Michelle Bachmann, certainly one of those. Rick Santorum is terrific on Israel, though I think he has no chance. The Republican nominee will come out of what I'll call 2 semifinals, and then I'll finish. There's what I'll call the establishment semifinal, and then there's the Tea Party social conservative final. On the establishment side, Mitt Romney has a huge edge at the moment. The people running against him for that sort of designation are Tim Pawlenty, John Huntsman, who seems to have followed the McCain strategy from 2000, which is to identify your base as the liberal media, Newt Gingrich, who's self-destructed, and maybe Rudy Giuliani, who this time can get to 15% in Florida. On the Tea Party side, social conservative side, and they are actually distinct groups. They're not the same groups. There's overlap, but they are distinct. But nonetheless, these are the people who write comments on the American Thinker website. Bachmann is well ahead right now, and that's because she's filling a space that Sarah Palin has not decided to enter, and because Rick Perry has not yet entered the race either. If Perry comes in, clearly he's going to compete with her for that space. And I think the fact that Bachmann's in right now makes it less likely that Palin will enter. Bachmann, at some point in time, if she becomes a serious candidate, will clearly be Palinized by the media. They simply hate conservative women, especially those who have 5 children. But she is a serious prospect at this point. And again, I'm comfortable with who we're going to come up with, and I think this guy is beatable. Thank you.
For those of you who just came, tonight's topic is, can Israel survive another Obama term? We are 1/3 to the answer. Next up is Professor Eugene Kontorovich. We're very pleased to have you. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank the RJC for putting together this wonderful panel, Michael Menace in particular for all his efforts, and the volunteers, and I want to thank all of you for sitting here in the huddled and crowded conditions. But I think everyone understands it's an indicator of how people are feeling and perhaps what is to come in 17 months. So in speaking of Obama's record on Israel, one needs to be subtle, of course, because Obama, he's not like a bad guy in the movies who comes out and says, "I'm going to get you, and I hate Israel, ha 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 ha." But it's not like that. Politicians aren't like that, actually. Rather, he comes out and he says he's a friend of Israel, and he says he supports Israel, and he says he is committed to Israel's security, and that's what he says. So unless one pays maybe considerable attention to the details, it is easy for people, especially those who want to believe, to believe that. And in particular, many people who would be inclined to be sympathetic to Obama, what I often hear from them is they say, well, what exactly has he done? What has he done that's so bad for Israel? Israel's still there, everything's the same. What has he actually done? What can you point to? And here, the answer is not necessarily immediately obvious, because Obama is a diplomatic person, and these matters are conducted in the language of diplomacy. So one needs to be able to read that language of diplomacy and see that what he has done has actually been unprecedented, awful, and very hard to square with any kind of genuine concern for Israel's interests. So first we'll mention what did he do bad, then we will mention what he didn't do good, and then, because often one forgets, one forgets all the good that was supposed to be done, and one should, that should not be discounted. And then we'll make some final comments. Clearly, one of the most striking and immediate things that Obama has done in relation to Israel, and he, from the beginning of his term, he said Israel was going to be at the top of his agenda, and he began his relationship with Israel by tearing up the Bush letter of 2005 to Ariel Sharon, which recognized Israel's legitimate claim to settlement blocks and the eastern Jerusalem and the holy areas as part of Israel in any final two-state settlement, and disclaiming any Palestinian right of refugee return. So Bush wrote this in a letter, and Obama claimed that this letter, it never happened. He said there was no such diplomatic commitment. Now, this was not a letter that Bush wrote, on the back of an envelope somewhere as a joke. This was a letter which was done in a very serious manner for what lawyers call consideration. It was part of a deal. There was a bargain, and it was a very serious consideration. In exchange for the guarantees embodied in this letter, Israel left Gaza, kicking out 10,000 Jews from their homes, left northern Shomron, and allowed a situation to arise in which Hamas took over in Gaza, and all of the southern Israel lives with the threat and reality of rocket fire from Gaza. That was the price of the Bush letter. This was not a freebie. This was not a passing remark. And indeed, the letter was endorsed by Congress through resolution. So this was about as serious a diplomatic commitment as one could make. And Obama's reaction was, well, that was Bush. That was Bush. That's not me. I'm not bound. That's an extraordinary thing. That's really like what you have in a banana republic, where you have a new government comes to power, and they say pledges, commitments, debts, deals taken out by the previous government, that doesn't bind us. It bespeaks an extraordinary lack of seriousness, and especially if the name of the game is Israel putting itself in an extraordinarily precarious position in reliance upon promises of future American goodwill. If any new administration can tear up such commitments and ignore them as if they never happened, then that's very scary. And we see with the Bush letter, that Obama wants to sell Israel, and this is going to be a common theme. What he wants to do is he wants to sell Israel the same horse twice. He wants to pocket Israeli concessions, throw out what was given in exchange, and demand that Israel pay for what America had pledged, or what the Palestinians had pledged, pay yet again. So now, for refugees, for Jerusalem, now Israel has to pay with its current sovereign territory, paying twice. So the Bush letter is an extraordinarily serious thing. And again, I think it's maybe a bit glib to call it the Bush letter. This was part of a serious diplomatic undertaking that Israel executed in the face of the entire world. Secondly, and this is also an extraordinarily important issue, the settlement freeze. Obama forced a complete settlement freeze on Israel. And this is not something which any president had done before, and it is not something which any Israeli government had undertaken before. So if one thinks Bibi is bad for peace, then one has to ask, why did Olmert not undertake a settlement freeze? Why did Olmert allow building in the settlements? Why did Rabin, the great hero of peace, why did he not undertake a settlement freeze? Why did he allow building in the settlements? A settlement freeze, people think it has to do with some kahanis on a hilltop somewhere not being able to build themselves a palace. The settlement freeze, and Obama was very particular about this. Bibi said, how about we allow building in settlement blocks, in Ma'ale Adumim? No. Totally was of no interest to Obama. The settlement freeze applied to every inch of territory in Yesha, in Yehuda and Shomron, and Jerusalem, equally. There was no better, there was no worse. And the effects of this were very hard to understate. And the effects are psychological, and they need some explanation. When one says that no Jew in Yesha can enclose a balcony, put up a shed, finish a school, what one is saying is the Jews have no right to be there at all. The Jews they're stealing someone else's house. All of them, they're in someone else's land. They're there on sufferance at most. Also, what it is, it's a silent disengagement. Right? The point of a settlement freeze is to force a unilateral Israeli return to the 49 armistice lines. Why? Because let's say you're living in a so-called consensus community. And I think what the settlement freeze shows is there is no consensus. Let's say you're living in the Jerusalem suburb of Ma'ale Adumim. And you know that no matter how big your family gets, you can't expand your house. You know that none of your friends can move in next door to you because they can't build houses. Things are frozen, but the thing is life isn't frozen. So if you say to a community, that's it, you're absolutely frozen. It's a sign to that community. It's over for you. Pack your bags and go. And people can't live under these conditions. And the idea is that they will slowly abandon their homes. These communities will dry out, and it will be like a Roman suicide. Slow, no one really notices what's happening. You just bleed out. And this amazing price, that was what Obama suggested and forced Israel to make as a preliminary confidence-building gesture. And he applied it to East Jerusalem, Eastern Jerusalem, as much as anything else. He made absolutely no discrimination. For Jerusalem, this is a massive issue. In Jerusalem, it's hard to maintain a Jewish population already because the rents are so expensive. And what Obama calls East Jerusalem is actually, if you look at a map, North, East, and South Jerusalem. And to the west, there's a highway. So what this means is Jews can't come to Jerusalem. The so-called occupied parts of Jerusalem are where most of the Jews of Jerusalem live. So the opening confidence-building gesture was chop off your head. That was the confidence-building gesture. The message, you're trespassers. But what's worse is the settlement freeze isn't actually over. The settlement freeze isn't over. In the West Bank, Bibi, who supposedly, in theory, likes a Jewish presence, at least in most of Yesha, or some of Yesha, has given less permits for building in the territories than any previous Israeli prime minister since the settlements began. Less than Rabin, less than Peres, less than Olmert. He's not doing this because he likes it. He's doing this because Obama is still holding a massive sword over his head. Because every Jewish house is a front page story in the New York Times. So there is currently a settlement freeze. And for this, Israel is not even getting any credit. This isn't even a confidence-building gesture. This is avoiding a complete deterioration of relations. This is quite scary. And what has Israel gotten in the way of credit for America for this massive undertaking? Not even a thank you. Not even a thank you. Thirdly, Obama has turned basic assumptions of the US-Israeli relationship into threats and favors, carrots and sticks. It used to be understood that because of the hostility of Europe, the hostility of undemocratic countries like China, the presumptive majority against Israel in the United Nations, the United States would be a balancing force and veto anti-Israel Security Council resolutions. Obama has thrown out that basic assumption. And again, people don't notice because he puts it diplomatically. But Obama has made the US veto of one-sided, vastly anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations. He's made that, instead of an assumption, instead of a basic part of American foreign policy in support of a fellow democratic country, he's made it a threat. As you recall, at the end of the settlement freeze, Obama made a supposedly generous offer. If you extend the freeze, you'll get American airplanes and you'll get a UN veto for a year. That's an extraordinary thing, because it means two things. It means you don't extend it, you're going to have to turn somewhere else for your fighter planes. You don't extend it, you might not get a Security Council veto. And even if you do, it's just for a year. A year. In other words, the US veto has been tied to the disallowance of Jewish population growth in Yesha. That's an extraordinary, to essentially housing segregation in Yesha. That's an extraordinary thing. Fourth, and this has been recently in the news, the insistence that Israel begin negotiations with the Palestinians on the basis of the 1949 armistice lines, with so-called agreed swaps. This is egregious in many ways. I want to focus, I think people understand the issue of the 49 borders and all the problems they presume. What to me is even more egregious is the idea of swaps. So first of all, what do we have here? This position throws out multiple diplomatic commitments, international legal commitments to Israel. United Nations Security Resolution 242, passed after the Six-Day War, specifically contemplated that Israel would not have to withdraw from all the territories it acquired. 242, out the window. Bush letter, out the window. But what's it really mean? What's it really mean? Where did we get the 49 lines from? We should remember where we got these 49 lines from. The 49 lines mark the furthest point of illegal Egyptian, Jordanian, and so forth aggression against the newly born state of Israel. That is, the lines did not come from a previously pre-existing Palestinian entity. They did not exist anywhere else on the map. They were not Ottoman administrative lines. They were not topographical lines. They marked as far as the Jordanians and Egyptians got in their attempt to turn the Palestinian mandate for the Jews into an Arab country. Saying that those lines now become the de facto starting point for a new Arab state is to say that the Jordanians and Egyptians, 45 years later, will be made successful in their illegal aggression. Also, to say that it's the starting point is to say Jewish presence in these areas is fundamentally illegitimate. Again, you're trespassers here. It's not saying, okay, the problem is we have different kinds of peoples here, maybe it would be better if everyone separates so they can live peacefully. That's not the statement that comes from saying the 49 lines will be the baseline. The statement comes, this is not your land. This was the Palestinians' land. And that's just not true. It never was the Palestinians' land. Now maybe a two-state solution is a good idea for various diplomatic and security purposes. But then that has nothing to do with the 49 borders, which the armistice line that created them with the Jordanians specifically said shall not have anything to do with any future political solution. But the swaps idea is particularly galling. The swaps idea says, okay, look, you can have the Kotel, you can have Ma'ale Adumim, but you have to pay for it with land in current sovereign Israel. What's this mean? So before we thought that there was a consensus. The consensus is Israel gets to keep a lot of the big settlement blocks, land important for security. Everyone assumed that Israel was within the consensus of what Israel gets to keep. No, Israel is not within the consensus of what Israel's got to keep. There's a new consensus, and Israel's current sovereign borders are themselves up for grabs. When you say that, nothing is sacred. Right? That means anything can go. Anything can go. Land that is already Israeli territory, the Palestinians now have a permanent lien on under Obama's formulation. The message is you have no business here. This is all quite extraordinary. Fifth, he has legitimized Hamas. He has legitimized Hamas. He previously had said we don't have to negotiate with Hamas. Now all of a sudden, Hamas is our new partner. And I'll mention one more thing. He has turned the General Assembly Declaration gambit of the Palestinians, a worthless gambit in international law, into a bludgeon with which to hit Israel. That is to say, let me tell you, people are very concerned about this General Assembly Declaration of Independence by the Palestinians. By the way, they already declared independence in 1988 and already are recognized by as many countries as recognize Israel. Under the clear charter of the United Nations, the General Assembly itself cannot admit or recognize members. That needs to be done with the Security Council. A declaration by the General Assembly would have no more force or legitimacy than their declaration that Zionism is racism, than their endorsement of the now retracted Goldstone Commission report, and similar other measures. It's completely worthless. But this now is going to be the big gift to Israel. Obama says in his speech, at the State Department, look, Israel is going to go back to 67 lines, plus swaps, but I've got a big favor for you. I'm not going to support the Palestinian declaration at the General Assembly. First of all, there's not much he can do to support or oppose it. The US veto is only in the Security Council. The whole point of the General Assembly move is to avoid that. So he's going to oppose a bogeyman, a creature of pure imagination, in exchange for making Israel give real concessions. And it's a good cop, bad cop routine with the Palestinians. The Palestinians say, we're going to go threaten this declaration. And so Obama can say, I'll save you from this declaration. The declaration is not what we need saving from. Hamas missiles up on the Shomron Hills, that's what we really need saving for. I'm basically out of time. Okay, so I'm out of time. I hope in questions people might wonder what did he not do good, as opposed to what he did bad. And I want to close by mentioning this is just the first term. This is Obama on his best behavior. This is Obama concerned about the Jewish vote. This is Obama who had a majority in both houses for half of his term, who still has a majority in one house. This is Obama who can still do domestic initiatives. An Obama with no re-election threat. An Obama with a minority of his party in both houses and no real ability to push a domestic initiative will have to focus on foreign policy initiatives, and I think we know what his initiative choice will be.
Thank you, Professor. And we'll have a chance to hear from the professor, as he said, during question and answer. You'll notice on your chairs, or most of your chairs, are, what is this, 4 by 6? How would you say this, Michael? 3 by 5, 3.5 by 7, or something? Well, these cards, these blank cards, are on your chairs, and we ask that you begin to fill these out. If you have a question, fill them out and then pass them up, and then we will choose the best ones. We asked the panelists. And we apologize in advance if we don't ask your question. We hope that we'll choose a wide variety and cover your topic. Okay, next up is...
if you need a pencil, we have, just raise your hand, we have all pencils.
And I take questions in Russian also.
Do we have RJC pencils for sale, Michael, to raise money? Okay, you'll have to use the Holiday Inn ones. Okay, next up is Matthew RJ Brodsky. We're of course very delighted to have him here and speak on the closing issue, can Israel survive another Obama term? And I would add, can the United States survive another Obama term?
want to thank you guys for having me here. Thank the RJC, Michael Menace. It's great to see so many people politically actively involved. I live in Washington, D.C., and when you're in the Beltway, it's all politics, all policy, all the time. And to see so many people who are very into politics and policy is really gives a good feeling. In answering the question, we have to realize that his approach to the Middle East, he has mistaken priorities right now. We've heard about the settlement freeze. And that was the first thing that basically made sure that there was not going to be any progress in peace negotiations at all. And this was 10 months that the Palestinian Authority then wasted by not negotiating. You know, they made some motions in the last month, and then we heard about the other settlement freeze. Now, the main issue that has come up, or what appears to be the main issue, is Obama's two speeches, the one May 19th at the State Department, and then 3 days later at AIPAC. And then, of course, Netanyahu's address to the Congress on May 24th. It would appear these days that if one were a Palestinian negotiator, the best current avenue to take is to simply wait for another Obama message. Because President Obama is in fact doing an outstanding job of representing the Palestinian position. I mean, simply put, why would Palestinians need to get into negotiations if every single time the President of the United States is going to go appear to be more Palestinian than the Palestinians? So when it comes to the exact wording, Obama's exact wording in his speech, both speeches he repeated the same thing. The borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps so that secured and recognized borders are established for both sides. So 1967 lines or borders, again, it's not a border, it's, as was said, the 1949 armistice lines, and land swaps. So by calling on Israel to accept the 1949 armistice lines as the basis for negotiations, and including the principle of land swaps, Obama effectively changed 4 decades of American policy and handed the Palestinian Authority a new starting point for negotiations. U.S. policy was previously based on UN Security Council Resolution 242. This called for, quote, withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict to, quote, secure and recognize boundaries free from threats or acts of force. This meant that the borders were to be both secure and negotiated. It was not a call on a full Israeli withdrawal, and that was a very deliberate point made. By formalizing the principle of land swaps now, President Obama is declaring that to solve the territorial conflict, he is formalizing an American position that Palestinians are now entitled to pre-1967 parts of Israel. Now, I come from the policy side. It's one thing if you have back-channel negotiations and you're discussing things, and in this issue, in the peace negotiations, it's always been nothing's agreed upon until everything's agreed upon type of thing. You can talk about things, but whatever offers are made are off the table if people don't agree to them, if the sides don't agree to them. So in giving Palestinians entitlement to pre-1967 Israel as a formal American policy statement is astounding. The timing is incredible, and I think we need to really pay attention to the fact that this happened 2 weeks after Fatah and Hamas formed a unity government. This was the timing. And not just that timing, but look at the broader picture of the Middle East and what's happening. There's been the Arab, quote, so-called Arab Spring right now. No one knows where that's going to go, really. No one can actually guarantee you where that's going to go. But his speech to the State Department, you would figure, should be about what's going to happen in Egypt. We're involved in Libya. We don't have really a clear policy objective. And yet Syria is our enemy. And we're doing nothing about that, even though they're killing more people. And they border Israel. He chose to devote a third of his speech in the State Department to the topic of Israel and peace negotiations. He starts off by saying, well, we shouldn't really tell Israel what to do. We shouldn't drop down our own plan or anything like that. And then he goes into a third of it is on the topic. It's amazing because you're sitting there, and again, I'm from the Jewish Policy Center. Obviously, I really, really care about Israel, but I'm sitting there watching the speech and thinking to myself, look at everything that's going on around you. Anyone heard of Iran recently? That is the most important problem in the Middle East right now. And I'm sure someone may be concentrating on it, but I don't know who. So I want to talk on land swaps, because when we discussed the land swaps in 1967, the issue here is that it's not really, this isn't about the occupation. It's not about the borders. If it was just about that, that would be something that could be solved a lot easier. The problem is really that Hamas and Fatah both together do not accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation. It's either Hamas wants destruction now, or Fatah on the authority through refugees return to Israel. It's the same thing. It's either an immediate or a later thing. So knowing that, we have to realize that even if we were at the table right now negotiating, if there was Israelis and Palestinians sitting across from the table actually in real negotiations, the fact would still remain that Fatah's demands are more than any Israeli government could ever accept, period. Those talks would collapse because their positions, their red lines, their core principles have not changed in any direction from 2000. In any sense, they've moved backward. So maybe we can talk in more detail about the land swap idea. These things have been, this has been something that's been discussed since December 2000 Clinton parameters before negotiations. These were discussed in Camp David. Again, these were never formalized. There were different ideas. And there's even a Washington Institute study right there that they're looking at, in fact. And it's interesting. It's called Imagining the Border. And this discusses ways in which you could have 80% of all the Israeli settlers within the West Bank, or the Israeli people in the West Bank, considered part of a land swap to Israel, and they can do that with 4.79% of a land swap. Now, again, these are all things that could be done in a negotiation if the conflict was just about an occupation, but that's not what the problem is. There's actually the problem of 1948, and that's the problem of Israel's existence. That's not a 1967 issue as far as the Palestinian Authority is concerned. Another point that Netanyahu and Obama very much disagreed on was the deferring of the refugee issue in return for deferring the Jerusalem issue. This is a problem. Another issue is how long there should be a transition for security arrangements. Obama's phrasing in the speech basically says that Israel would not be able to keep any advanced early radar system in the Jordan Valley. And this has been something that they've always asked for. And the other problem is the impact of the Arab Spring on peace negotiations. For some reason, all the instability in the Middle East, and Obama sees this now as the time to definitely push ahead for peace. That makes sense to me, not at all. It's a perfect example of why you should really see how things shake out. If the only country that Israel, well, the first country that Israel had to make peace with is Egypt, and we don't know how that's going to shake out, that's very important. That was like the crowning jewel of American diplomacy in the Middle East, was that peace agreement. The way Obama has been approaching the Middle East is a dramatic shift from how the Middle East was viewed in the past. For more than half a century, Washington has looked at the Middle East, allies and adversaries, as nation states. These were states that had specific interests, and you dealt with them in a certain manner. Obama sees the Muslim world as unified. You could see this in his Cairo speech to begin with. He's speaking to world Muslims as though this is how they operate in the Middle East. It's as opposed to the fact that it is a clan on tribe, Shia versus Sunni, Arab versus Persian conflicts. The Arab Spring that we're seeing right now, this is what we're seeing all over the place, all over the region, is this type of warfare. So Obama has basically taken a brand new approach to the Middle East, and it's detrimental. Engaging currently with our adversaries and our enemies, and then throwing Israel under the bus. You have to ask, if Iran is the most important thing in the region, which should be agreed upon, stopping their nuclear program, that we should be devoting resources and time to that. Egypt, doesn't seem to make sense that you throw someone who had been an ally of the United States under the bus within 2 weeks. And in Syria, you have an enemy of the United States. They built a nuclear program that was destroyed in 2007, are thought to be behind the murder of the former Palestinian prime minister. They arm Hezbollah, host Hamas. Lebanese. The list of transgressions for them goes on, and the United States hasn't done anything. And again, this makes absolutely no sense, because when Obama came into office, his idea was that you should flip Syria from Iran, that would weaken Iran. Now, I would argue that that wouldn't make that great of a difference, but even if you're him, he's sabotaging his own policy. Because if the best way to weaken Iran is to flip Syria, then the only way you can do that right now is to actually flip the regime and to help that happen. It's not going to happen through engagement, through enticements. I don't know, you just look at the news every day and you can see the amount of people that the Assad regime is killing, and you'll know that he really means to stay in power and he doesn't want to go. So if you want to accomplish Obama's task itself, you would actually have to work for Syria's downfall. So, I mean, if we're looking for any form of silver lining within the Obama world and policy, I suppose the only thing could be that George Mitchell, his special Middle East envoy, he stepped down before Obama made his speech, and the word is that what he wanted was Obama to put down his own proposal and to basically force that on the Israelis and Palestinians, and that at least he saw that as maybe being a bit too much. Now, that's not a lot to hang your hat on. So with that, I'll leave for questions.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. We are now going to come to the question portion of the night. The first question is to the entire panel. One of the ways to win an argument is to control the language. So why is it that we accept the language that is put out by the people who are enemies of the United States and Israel? Why do we call it the West Bank and not Judea and Samaria? Why do we call them settlers instead of citizens of the State of Israel? Why is it that we allow the enemies to control the language and therefore the argument, and the sole purpose of which is to delegitimize Israel and to help hasten its destruction? I open this to anyone.
It's a great question and a wonderful point. I think it's a valid point. I think using accurate terminology has great psychological value. It does help shape the way people think about it. At the same time, for example, when I speak to groups about these issues, there's a trade-off between, on one hand, wanting to push the right kind of terminology, which might have long-term effects, and using language which people understand and know what you're talking about. So if you say yesha to a general audience, they just won't understand what you're talking about, and your points will be lost upon them. However, it is important to understand that this is the areas are Yehuda and Shomron. It is nothing foreign to us. And the language which I think is most problematic is the language of settler, because the language claims to resonate in international law, that this activity called settlement is illegal in international law. There is no concept in international law of settler. It is not a word of international law. There is a concept in the Geneva Conventions of transfer, and the accusation technically in international law is that the inhabitants of Yesha are transferees. I think people don't like to use the word transferees because it would seem ridiculous that someone who had been born in Yesha had been transferred there. That's illogical. So that may be the reason for the language of transfer, of settler, but clearly it is language that does not really capture the reality.
What I'd add is I think the words that have had the most damage are illegal occupation, more so than the geographic boundaries. And those are simply incorrect statements legally. But very few people, Eugene is certainly one of them, have fought back on that. And unfortunately, the mainstream media has accepted all of the language of the conventional wisdom, which is Israel has illegally occupied the territories with settlers, and these are, in fact, territories that belong to someone else.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question to Professor Eugene. Don't do good. Explain.
Yes. One thing that in politics it's easy to lose track of is all the promises people made you and didn't keep. And especially in the area of Israeli-Palestinian peace, it's really important to remember all the golden palaces of peace that have been promised and not materialized, and to hold the people who claim that they could deliver these golden palaces of peace, to hold them accountable. Now, Obama, from the moment he was elected, he claimed that because of his perhaps greater legitimacy in the Arab and Muslim world, he would be able to deliver peace, and he would also be able to deliver results for Israel. So, for example, these are some claims he made. He said, if he criticized Israel, if he showed that he was willing to be critical of Israel, the Palestinians would trust him and they would come to the negotiating table. Didn't happen. Okay, next stage. He said, maybe it's not right. After there was a lot of pushback, he said, maybe it would be good for the Arabs to make some gestures to Israel too. So in exchange for a settlement freeze, and this was Tom Friedman's idea originally, the president borrows a lot of these ideas, maybe the Arab states could make some moves in the direction of recognizing Israel, maybe allowing Israel to fly over some of their countries on the way to the Far East. So if you remember, that was a big part of the diplomacy. He went around to different Arab countries, he talked to them. Can anyone imagine now, given the Arab revolutions, that a single Arab country is going to show the slightest conciliation towards Israel? Impossible. What about the fact that that was what we were supposed to get for settlement freeze? Forget it, it's forgotten. Then there was the idea that maybe concessions on the settlements would be in exchange for tough action on Iran. And this was very much in the papers, that Israel has to choose between the settlements and Iran. Now this was not selling the same horse twice, this was selling the same horse to two different people. Because of course Obama promised the people of America, who have as great and perhaps greater interest in dealing with the Iranian nuclear threat, that he would prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. This was a promise he made in his campaign. He seems to have done essentially nothing to further this aim, and at the best moment for doing so, during the street protests in Iran, he did not come out strongly on the side of the protesters. He did not say the government of Iran is illegitimate. Speaking of the Arab Spring, it's important to note that the State Department has said that Assad, the dictator of Syria, is in danger of losing his legitimacy if he continues massacring his people. On the other hand, Jewish presence in Jerusalem is illegitimate. That's illegitimate from the get-go. So this suggests a fundamentally flawed calculus. So criticizing Israel, bringing the Palestinians to negotiate didn't happen. Arab states doing favors, no one can imagine that will ever happen, but that was supposed to be the quid pro quo. Okay, do it without the quid pro quo, he says now. Okay, what about Iran? Okay, also do it without Iran. So Israel's concessions are constantly demanded, and any action from the other side, forget about it.
Thank you.
I want to make one quick comment too about the Iranian situation, and that is that Obama made resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict the central issue in getting Iran to change its policies with regard to nuclear weapons. And if you think about the absurdity of that at the time Obama took office, you have a complete split with Hamas in charge of Gaza. At that point, not too long after they took over from Fatah, massacred a couple hundred people in the space of a week, and the Palestinian Authority weakly in control of Judea and Samaria, only really because of the presence of the IDF to prevent Hamas from taking over there. And what he's telling Israel is, you need to make peace with the Palestinians now, and then we'll have some luck maybe with Iran. Now, for the last 10 years we've been hearing that Iran is 3 to 5 years away from completing a nuclear program. At some point you can't always be 3 to 5 years away from completing a program. And obviously the president's approach has been time is not critical in that regard. Because if you have an issue that's been unresolved for 60 years, that needs to be resolved first before the United States will show any muscle with regard to Iran.
Thank you. Oh.
I just want to add to that. What Richard is saying is, again, this is a part of the linkage theory that everything is linked to the peace negotiations, Israel and Palestinians. Nothing should show that that is further from the truth than the events that have gone on right now. It is actually, the only way things are linked is in fact in the exact opposite manner than Obama believes it. Things are linked in that if Iran is prevented from getting nuclear weapons, if they're prevented from supporting terrorist organizations, it makes it that much easier for moderates to come to the forefront around the region. So, and beyond that, just looking around the whole Middle East, nothing that is happening there right now in any of these uprisings in any of these states has a thing to do with Israel at all.
Thank you, Matthew. Next question. What should the United States do if you were advising President Obama beside not to seek re-election, to prevent Iran from getting the bomb, since they're only months away from having a bomb and realizing their dream of annihilating and destroying the state of Israel?
The advice I would give the president on how to prevent Iran from going nuclear. I would invest in a lot more technology and viruses that can prevent the spinning of centrifuges. I would, first of all, you have to have all options always on the table, and you need to say that, and that's not spoken. Every president should be able to say that, and we should say that, and we should mean that. Working with Israel, and I tend to believe that we do have some intelligence assets that are able to affect, let's just say, over the year there have been a few different Iranian scientists that magically turn up dead. No one knows who did it, what happened, how it is, but it strikes me that the hardest thing to replace in the Iranian nuclear equation are the people themselves who actually know how to run it. That's another option. But in the end, the fact is, and Iran becoming a nuclear power is something the United States should not at all be able to tolerate and has to act to stop it. Would start a nuclear arms race in the midst of countries now that are currently in the midst of internal uprisings. It would be the most horrible situation imaginable.
Part of the issue with Iran is I don't think they take seriously at all the idea that the American military response is on the table anymore, which Matt hinted at. They actually say things from time to time at all options are on the table. The question is, do they take them seriously? From my perspective, the best thing the United States could do would be to actively encourage regime change in Iran. We missed an opportunity in 2009. The president and the consulates and the embassies around the world had invited, as part of the engagement process with Iranian diplomats to come to U.S. This is a true story. U.S. embassies for July 4th parties, presumably non-pork hot dogs would have been served. And this was going on at the same time as the Green Revolution. And the administration did not want to jeopardize this outreach to Iran, which they're toying with. They're mocking the United States. And there's actually a belief, and I think Obama believes his name was enough, his background was enough to change worldviews about the United States, or to change the hostility from countries that are run by, if you think of the worst people you ever knew in your life, they run these countries, but they're 3 times as vicious. And he believes that somehow, because of who he is, that attitudes towards the United States would change, attitudes towards Israel could change, because he would reverse that Bush process of somehow damaging relations with the Muslim world. So, all Bush did is try to help free 50 million Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, a lot of credit he got for it.
Richard? A question for Richard. Now that his policies failed in 2.5 years, is he just an ideologue? Is he just ignorant when it comes to foreign policy? Or is some other agenda as to why he won't change his policy and how to treat these tyrannical regimes?
Again, and Ed Lasky's here, more people needed to read his columns back in 2007, 2008. Obama had the most left-wing voting record in the United States Senate. This is a guy who spent his life before he came to the U.S. Senate in academia at Harvard, at Columbia, and at the University of Chicago. He was a community organizer. You will not find more toxic anti-Israel hostility in America than in the locations where he was and in the jobs he had. Okay? None of this should have been a surprise at all. He is an ideologue. And as I think Matt said, and Eugene too, in his second term, Obama can be Obama without essentially the pressure of having to finesse the Jewish community and hope that the threshold bar for support from liberal Jews keeps dropping every year, to a level where it's, that no one could possibly limbo dance to the best in the world, wouldn't be able to get through it. He is an ideologue, and he is at heart a redistributionist, both in domestic policy and foreign policy. And redistribution explains his thinking. In foreign policy, he is uncomfortable with American power and American leadership, and he believes Israel is the strong power, the Palestinians are the weak power, in the same way as he looks at the distribution of economic wealth and income in the United States, and he wants to move it from those who have to those who don't. That is the fundamental precept, I think, that governs him in both domestic and foreign policy. And obviously, when he views Israel surrounded by 20 hostile neighbors, 6 million Jews or 5.5 million Jews surrounded by 400 million Arabs and 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, and he sees Israel as the strong party in that scenario, there's not a lot of hope that he's going to somehow be educated in the next few years.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay. The next question is, how can Republicans counter the Democratic political organization? How can we take Jewish votes from the Democrats and move them to the Republican column? What is the magical argument that will turn Jewish hearts to the right side of this argument?
I'll start. You notice that whether the question's addressed to me or not, I always grab the mic. I think that concentrating on shifting 10 or 15% of the Jewish vote is not where our efforts need to be made. It's to get the other 97.5% of America to wise up. I think the movement among American Jews will be modest this year. It'll move in the right direction. Obama will not do as well as he did in 2008. But the shifts among other groups of voters are likely to be much larger. Among Latinos, who have unemployment rate that's 2-3% higher than the national average, young people who can't find jobs. This is where I think the shift is going to occur, when people who see $4.50 gasoline prices and wonder why we're doing nothing to expand the domestic resource capability. Israel will be an issue, I think, primarily with the evangelical community. And I expect that their rejection of Obama in 2012 will be very strong. The only issue that concerns me about evangelicals is this odd issue between evangelicals and Mormons. And there are two Republican candidates seeking the presidential nomination, John Huntsman and Mitt Romney, who are Mormon. And I certainly never studied a lot of Christian doctrine when I was growing up in the Bronx, where my public school had a higher Jewish percentage than some Hebrew schools do here. So I don't know a heck of a lot about it. I can't explain it. I don't adequately understand it. But some evangelicals do seem to think Mormons are kind of off the reservation. And I got to believe that in the end, not having Obama in a second term will trump that kind of philosophical, religious concern. But it is a little bit bothering me in the background.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, next question to Professor Kontorovich or Matthew Brodsky. Sorry, Richard. What will happen? Let's say hypothetically that the UN Security Council does recognize a Palestinian state. What will happen? What are the dominoes? What will occur next in the next year or two?
Okay, so I think realistically speaking, a Security Council recognition of a Palestinian state has almost no chance of happening. And indeed, when you hear the Palestinians formulate their plan, it seems that their idea is to go straight to the General Assembly to not have the embarrassment of being voted against in the Security Council. I think in September, it would be extremely hard for Obama not to veto this resolution, and that's why he wants Israel to surrender to the Palestinians and put him out of the uncomfortable place of having to actually veto it. Even if the resolution were to pass, I don't think it would be the diplomatic tsunami or end of the world that people describe. So people say, look, this would mean that Israel is occupying the territory of another country. Isn't that what everyone says it's been doing for the past 40 years? Under the Geneva Conventions, you can only occupy the territory of a country. So there's only one kind of occupation. So the Palestinians say, oh, this is really occupation now, unlike the not real occupation. I'm not sure they want to say that. Also, many countries occupy each other's territory without any seeming negative effects. India, Pakistan, Kashmir, China, lots of other countries. Russia is a great example because it has, before our very eyes, in recent years, occupied chunks of Georgia, several chunks of Georgia. At the time, the US and Europe threatened to kick them out of the G8, which is not a big punishment. They didn't even do that, and not only did they not kick them out of the G8, Russia, who has occupied Georgia in our own days, kept its seat in the so-called Middle East Quartet, the job of which is to get Israel to unoccupy Palestine. So this is a little silly. Turkey occupies Cyprus. Morocco occupies Western Sahara. Turkey is supposed to be this moderate Muslim country that's going to bring us also peace in the Middle East. And indeed, when you hear about Turkey and Morocco, you just hear about what moderate, nice Muslim countries they are. So nothing will inherently happen. A General Assembly resolution is worth even less. The idea of this is that it's supposed to be a focal point for anti-Israeli activity, like a signal. So with the pogroms, no serious people, the members of the police, nobody believed that the Jews were actually using Christian blood. Right? I mean, the peasants might believe this, but real people didn't believe it. Educated people didn't believe this. What's the point of a blood libel? The point of a blood libel is to say, today's the day. Like, why Passover? So everyone knows that there's like a time when everyone's going to gang. Goldstone Commission report, same thing. Zionism is racism, same thing. The idea is it's supposed to be a signal all together now, one last push. So, but it's the push rather than the resolution that prompts it that would be the problem. And since the resolution is pretextual as an international legal matter, one shouldn't fear the resolution, right? Because pretext can be manufactured. And let me put it this way. If this recognition business is really the gun at Israel's head that the Palestinians and the press make it out to be, why haven't the Palestinians pulled this gun before? They were just being nice? If they have this drop-dead kung fu move of going to the UN, why haven't they done it in the past 10 years? Or, to put it differently, if they have this drop-dead kung fu move, why are they saying, oh, but listen, give us everything, almost everything, and we won't use our drop-dead kung fu move? Why not use the move? And if it is that move, if we enter into negotiations with them, we might as well just write them a blank check, right? Sign State of Israel at the bottom, they can fill it in, because otherwise, at the moment they don't like what they're getting, they can always go back and do their kung fu move. So if you think they have this special ninjutsu, then we might as well lie down and die. But rather, I mean, it's problematic, it's concerning, it would allow them to maybe to pursue international criminal court charges, all sorts of little brush fires would break out, but they may be manageable. And the important thing is to talk to people who think that we are facing this diplomatic tsunami and tell them that is not the tsunami to be afraid of.
I think we should understand two things. There's been less progress in peace negotiations now under Obama's administration since any time since Lyndon Johnson's administration. And we should also recognize that the only reason that we are at a point where this is even coming up is because of Obama's missteps in the peace process. If he at least worked to make a legitimate process, it's hard to see this happening. But with the mistakes that he has made, this is why we're here. And we also have to understand this is the point of the unity government for the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority, or Fatah and Hamas, it's a gang rivalry. They dislike each other immensely. the reason they're together is for this resolution right now, so they can say to the international community that we are in fact one people. Again, as he said, if the resolution passes, comes to a vote, it's not going to change much that's on the ground. The fear there is, once again, that Israel is constantly being delegitimized, even lied about in the Goldstone report, as it turns out. It's one more step along that avenue. And for that, what I'm saying is it would be best if there were a process, if you could back up 2 years ago to the beginning of the Obama administration and wipe the settlement freeze demand away. If you could wipe out everything else he did, you could at least have a process going on, even though a settlement is not in the offing right now, and still devote most of your resources to the things that are really important, Iran and now the Arab Spring.
I'd just like to make one unrelated comment to the people who are in the back. It's really wonderful. Thank you guys so much for standing up through all of this. It's been amazing, and I have watched your standing with great admiration. And in response to a question I got, I'm a professor at Northwestern University, but they take no responsibility for anything I say.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, how much time do we have? Can we keep on going?
Maybe one more?
One more. 4 more, okay. Not 4 more years, but 4 more questions. The next question is, when President Obama unilaterally changed United States policy towards Israel and said that it would be nice if they returned to the 1949 armistice lines, that National Treasurer of Israel, Tzipi Livni, showed her unwavering support and applauded Obama. If you were advising Netanyahu, what would you advise him to do in response to President Obama's brilliant idea?
I think he did a terrific job in terms of the press conference, and an even better job in front of the U.S. Congress. I think in many ways it was his finest moment, because at that press conference you had an Israeli prime minister laying out for everyone who would watch the case for Israel and why this is such a dangerous situation for Israel, and why what sounds like, the babble that diplomats have been talking about for 40 years is realistically not an option for Israel. And if you look at the speech to Congress, this is significant, because even if Obama wins and doesn't have to run again, Democrats do have to run again, and they do need Jewish money and Jewish votes. The level of liberal Jewish support for Democratic candidates is astonishing. 60% of the money to the Democratic National Committee comes from Jews. Over a third of all the money Obama raised came from Jews in 2008, most of it in terms of maximum gifts that were allowed in that year, $2,400 for both the primary and the general election. The Democratic Party, as a party, needs ties to the Jewish community. And one of the issues that's been raised here is, can you get separation between Democrats in Congress and Obama? And it's becoming a little bit easier. It was almost impossible before the health care bill was passed. Since that was passed, since that was the rainbow dream for so many liberal Democrats, those who are legitimately pro-Israel, and there are Democrats in Congress who are terrific on Israel, and Israel needs bipartisan support in Congress, because otherwise its security and relationship with the United States depends on the next election. That's not healthy. And that's why AIPAC tries to maintain ties with both. It is important to essentially emphasize that Obama is here, and the two-party traditional support for Israel is somewhere completely different.
On Livni's comments, this is very much an internal Israeli political issue. And we should note that when it comes to what was actually spoken about, what Obama said about land swaps and about the 67 lines, or the armistice line. In 2008, Olmert also, like Livni, also Kadima, They were negotiating with Abbas and the Palestinians, and Olmert was looking for a 6.3% land swap, and it was Abbas who wanted a 1.9% land swap. These are things that they had already been discussing, again, back channel. Now, these are things that if the Kadima party were actually the one holding the reins in Israel, they would not be publicly saying, yay, they're in the opposition. So this is something that they're going to want to say. Also, there is tremendous pressure, I think, from this administration. They would love to see Netanyahu and Likud partner up with Kadima so that we could get some form of more moderate, shall we say, malleable form of Israeli government that Obama could supposedly bash around to his own liking.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew Brodsky. Next question. If Arab countries were to invade Israel, attack it, can any of you say with certainty what President Obama would do?
If he were golfing that day? There is no formal American requirement to come to Israel's defense in terms of a military invasion. There is, I think, an implied strength of a military relationship and political relationship that if Israel's survival was at stake through a traditional type of ground war, that the United States would do what it could, such as during the '73 war when Nixon overruled Kissinger, who was the one blocking it because he thought he could get some concessions out of the deal, and sent over plane loads of supplies for Israel, which was in a tough state in the first few days of that war. I don't think you're going to see an American military presence, actually, in terms of a war, but in terms of hardware support and political support, I think you get it. The nuclear issue is much more complex. And there, if the United States made a commitment that any use of nuclear weapons against Israel would be regarded as an attack on the United States, that in a sense is suggestive of we accept that there will be nuclear power and now we've switched to deterrence rather than prevention, which to me is very problematic.
I don't think an Arab invasion of Israel is one of our greatest concerns at this point. I think Iranian nuclear extortion is a serious concern. I think attrition through missiles is a great concern. So the way the Arabs hope to defeat Israel at this point is they set up some Katyushas in the Shomron, up in the hills, after a so-called peace deal. And it's tough to live in Sderot now, but the people now, they don't have many options, and lots of people don't live there anymore. But when the rockets start falling on, God forbid, Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, all of which would be within easy range, anyone who can, and lots of people who couldn't, would get on the first plane to America, Canada, Germany, wherever, and that's the way the bags would be packed up and the tent folded. That's the hope, not an existential knockout blow, just a making life impossible. And the question that's more important than would America come to Israel's aid, I don't think Israel needs America's aid so much. In a situation like this, would America support a vigorous Israeli response? That's the real question. And I think it's very hard to be confident on that. By the way, I think this criticism of Obama is not particular to Israel. I think if I was a South Korean, a Japanese, a Pole, a Romanian, or really a Colombian, I would have similar anxieties, as indeed they are having. The South Koreans are probably much more anxious, actually, than Israel about what they would perceive as Obama's lack of response.
Let's look at actual scenarios then where Israel could be attacked by an Arab state right now, or Persian state, as could be the issue. Syria right now is undergoing their huge uprising. Assad has been sending Palestinians from their own camps across the border and trying to make it look like it's some Al-Nakba Day celebration, a return of the refugees to Israel. There is a scenario in which if Assad in Syria is falling and his last straw is to attack Israel, then he would do that because his claim to fame is, you can trust me. I'm the leader bastard who doesn't actually attack you myself. I just occupy, control Lebanon, and through proxies and through Hamas, who is supported in Gaza, I attack you there. That's the Assad way of thinking. So that's something that could happen. The only other scenario, really, it's not, we've been moving away from a state-on-state conflict and more toward organizations, terrorist groups. And there's, again, Hezbollah, something could happen there. And that depends on what happens with Iran. If Israel does something against Iran in a nuclear program. And then there is still, Hezbollah is in a very rough position in Lebanon right now. I mean, they're leading the country, but it's extraordinarily tense. The extent to which Hezbollah would right now want to play the card of attacking Israel, it wouldn't make sense for them too much domestically from a Lebanese context. And as was said, it really is, it's not a matter of the US rushing to protect Israel as much as it is giving them the time to have a vigorous response and allowing that vigorous response. I mean, you have, Hezbollah had, I think it was roughly 20,000 missiles before in the 2006 war. Now the estimates are up to 60,000. That's, yeah, bless the UN and Resolution 1701, which did nothing stopping that war. This is, that's where the problems in the future lie. The US, in that scenario, Israel would have to be allowed to do far more destruction to Hezbollah and their military arsenal than they did in 2006. So it's American support for Israel.
Thank you, Matthew. Second to last question. Could any of you explain to the audience what is the legal status of the land that Israel won in the Six-Day War? Are they occupiers, as Obama and his supporters would state, or is there a different status under international law?
Okay, I gave a whole talk on this subject in this forum maybe a year or two ago. It's a big question. So first of all, I should say occupier is not a bad word in international law. The occupation is not illegal in international law. As a matter of fact, much of what the Geneva Conventions do is tell you how to behave as an occupier and set out rules and regulations for occupation. Occupation is not illegal, it's not a bad thing, it's not generally thought to be a very long-term thing, but there's no particular end date on it. Occupation is what happens when one nation winds up controlling the territory of another as a result of warfare, and that is not illegal in itself. So occupation is not such a bad thing. The area of the West Bank was, by an authoritative international action in the League of Nations mandate in the early 1920s, set out by the League of Nations, the authoritative international body at the time, as a homeland for the Jewish people, for the creation of a Jewish state. It was supposed to be given, it was just a Jewish state. This was its complete and final legal status under a British mandate. The British absconded before they could hand over the keys. The Jewish state was created. And between 1949 and 1967, the status of these territories was under illegal Jordanian and Egyptian occupation. So when Jordan and Egypt occupied them, they were occupied, but the Jordan attempted to annex it, and that annexation was not recognized as legal by all but two countries, Britain and Pakistan. So between 1948 and 1967, I think one could fairly say either Israel possessed the superior claim to this territory by virtue of the League of Nations mandate, or the territory remained up in the air, in dispute, terra nullius, its status not yet finalized. So when Israel retook this land, or took this land in the Six-Day War, it seems it would have had the best title of any nation, and its ability to keep territory acquired in the Six-Day War was reaffirmed in UN Security Council Resolution 242. So Israel's presence there, it could be politically problematic, it could be non-expedient, but I think it would be very hard to call it obviously illegal.
Thank you very much, Professor. Last question. Jonathan Pollard, if the Jewish people are going to give so much money to help President Obama be elected, shouldn't he show his support and thank you by releasing Jonathan Pollard?
I want to address this first. I think my views on this point are not going to be very popular, but one has to think about the general proposition one is advocating. Jonathan Pollard clearly violated US laws and committed espionage against the United States. If the way the system works is people who come from particular ethnic groups and spy against the United States can be pardoned as a favor to those ethnic groups, that's not going to be good for the Jews or good for America. So you have, what about Muslim Americans who are caught spying against America? There are those people. So the Muslim community has been good to President Obama also. Should he show his favor by pardoning them? Or what about Koreans and Chinese? There's many different kinds of ethnic spies. And the concern is if one turns this into a game of ethnic politics, it's not clear how this is good for the rule of law, good for America, and good for the Jews.
Yeah, there's a very good article in Commentary, I think it was a month ago, by Jonathan Tobin, which really looked at this. It's a complex, nuanced article, and I recommend it. The issue with Pollard is you won't find, even on the Republican side, a lot of support for the United States freeing him or trading him, maybe trading him if there was some American spy caught or something like that in Israel. But in general, the line that was given or provided by Caspar Weinberger to the judge, the sentencing judge, which was that Pollard had essentially compromised American agents abroad, some of whom had been liquidated. That was probably false. There were Russian spies who had much more authority and much more access to information around the same time, who actually wound up getting shorter sentences than Pollard. So you can argue with this sentence. But in the same way that it becomes a real problematic issue, does Israel exchange 1,000 Hamas murderers or attempted murderers to get the remains back of one soldier who's fallen in Lebanon? And that's a pretty complex issue. This one here, I think, is not a political winner for Jews in the United States. It's not worth the capital invested by Israel to pursue it, especially now. I think the Obama administration made a mistake by not, on a humanitarian basis, allowing him to go to his father's funeral. That just looks petty and cheap and vindictive. I mean, after all, there are people who try to assassinate President Reagan and people who are convicted murderers and rapists who are given weekend leaves to go to their families. So going to a funeral doesn't seem to me to be a big sacrifice. But in terms of the release, I can think of a lot more issues on which I would prefer that we pressure Obama than that one.
Okay.
I think you heard two very valid viewpoints. I would just simply add that going with the thinking that Obama has taken on the Palestinian leadership's role of negotiations, I'm almost just waiting for him to hold up Pollard for the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the Republican Jewish Coalition, Chicago chapter, I'd like to thank our panelists. Again, they are Matthew RJ Brodsky, Professor Eugene Kontorovich, and Richard Baehr. I'd also like to thank someone. Without his support and leadership, we would not be here today. There would be no Chicago chapter, and I think that we would be severely weakened as a community without Michael Menace.
Well, I as well would like to thank you all for being here. Thank the panelists. Professor Kontorovich came in on a flight last night from Israel, so I'm sure he is jet lagged, and we appreciate his participation. RJ came in from Washington this afternoon, so thank you for your travels. Richard came from Lincoln Park. Richard, thank you. For those people who have been longtime supporters, thank you. We appreciate it. For those here for the first time, if you liked what you saw or what you heard, I ask that you please consider joining. Certainly keep coming to our events. Again, we have that event on July 24th. That's dealing not with international issues, but a very, very important issue that can affect America's ability to deal internationally, and that has to do with the legislative map. So thank you all. Have a good night, and if anybody found a little red Canon camera, please let me know. Thank you.